What's up, YouTube? How we looking? Coach Max here, back in the coach's chair. The last couple of times we were here, we were talking NBA 2K. This time, though, I want to talk a little about the association, as some in the media might say. Wow, that sounds a bit pretentious coming from me with my minuscule sub count, but it gets the point across. I'm going to be talking about NBA stuff today. By now, you've probably heard that the New Orleans Pelicans and their general manager Dell Demps have mutually agreed to part ways, or in more plain English, Dell Demps was fired. Among the reasons cited were a desire to take back control of the franchise from outside forces, and all of the drama surrounding the Anthony Davis trade situation and how that was handled, or mishandled. The latter has already been discussed at some length, but I'll be adding to that discussion. As for the former, well, at the time, Twitter was jokingly attributing this to LeBron James and possibly to a lesser extent Rich Paul and Clutch Sports. Nowadays, the joke is that Dell Demps is responsible for the Lakers' current chemistry issues. Not going to discuss that. Anyway, if you read between the lines of the reasoning behind the firing somewhat, I think it paints a picture that is a bit less great than the public face they're trying to put on it. Now, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. In my opinion, firing Dell Demps at this point was 100%, absolutely, unequivocally, dumb as dirt. Now, I'm not saying he didn't deserve to be fired, though I'm really loath to say that anybody deserves to be fired simply for making mistakes, even if they're as large and public as the Anthony Davis stuff was. I mean, he wasn't the greatest GM out there by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not like he pulled a Billy King or a David Kahn. He was just a middle-of-the-road at best GM, then he got handed a live grenade that was covered in spikes and on fire, and managed to hold onto it long enough for it to blow up in his face. What I'm trying to get at here is that I don't completely disagree with the Pelicans' decision to move on from Dell Demps. Especially on the back of the AD situation, I don't think he's the man for the job, and you gotta do what's best for the team. But I incredibly disagree with the timing, as well as the reasoning. In my eyes, it's the way this was handled and not anything Dell Demps did or didn't do that might make the Pelicans a contender for one of the worst front offices in the NBA, at least for now. I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a fan of mid-season firings in general. I agree that sometimes they're a necessary move, such as controlling a catastrophic situation that requires swift, but more importantly, decisive action. In my research, I also found another potential pro, that being the ability to search openly and publicly for the next person up, which the Pelicans are already doing. But I don't agree with firing a coach or an executive just because the team is losing or mistakes were made, especially if it's relatively on the heels of said losses or mistakes. Except in the case of something that necessitates decisive action, as I mentioned before, it just always seems like a situation where the time is never right and everyone involved loses somehow. Somebody loses their job, those that remain have to spend time worrying about damage control, and the team either doesn't really get better or otherwise just kind of concedes the season, which is distinctly different from tanking or rebuilding no matter how you spin it. Back to my disagreement. It's not a secret that the Pelicans, for all their talent, haven't really been able to build a solid core around Anthony Davis, and that is part of why AD wants to be traded, if you take Rich Paul's statement of Anthony wants to be traded to a team that allows him the chance to win consistently and compete for a championship, at literal face value. The other side of that coin is that Anthony Davis believes that the Pelicans aren't that team and won't be anytime soon. That alone makes the franchise look a bit suspect, especially if people remember that Chris Paul also requested to be traded out of New Orleans right before Anthony Davis ever got there. Star players might not want to go play somewhere where there's a track record of other stars not wanting to play there or not being treated right while they are there, and sometimes a lot of goodwill can be eliminated in just one move. Just ask Masai Ujiri about what happened after the DeMar DeRozan trade. That being said, it's actually pretty easy to understand why one would fire a coach or executive mid-season following a string of poor performances. In one respect, it's not all that different from letting them go following a poor season. There comes a time where enough is enough and it's time for a change. But is the middle of the season that time? Especially after such a public fiasco? That's a pretty hard question to answer, as everything is subjective. But if you were to ask me my opinion, any move like this should be made with not just an aim to improve the team, but a plan for it. And this goes back to my disagreement with the timing of things. When you fire somebody on the back of poor performance in the mid-season, especially when it's made clear that there is already a search for a successor, it's very hard to make it seem like something other than a reactionary move as opposed to something you wanted to do all along. When you add statements like angry over the Davis trade demand and outside forces are trying to push the franchise in a direction that don't make sense for it, you start to wonder just what the powers that be are thinking, or if they're thinking at all. Well, since I'm wondering what they're thinking, let's do some thinking on the subject. Specifically, I want to speculate on potential motivations and methods for the firing of Dell Demps now as opposed to later. It won't change anything, and hindsight is 20/20, but I'm hoping that Pelicans ownership and upper management have either done something like this or are planning to at some point, just to know how best to handle it next time this happens. Let's start with my initial belief based on the available statements, that there might have been some lead up to this, but the Anthony Davis trade situation was the straw that broke the Pelicans' back. To sum up, the Lakers reportedly offer up the best of their young core and then some, plus some first-round picks. Dell Demps goes, "Nah, give me like double that." Lakers tell Demps to pound sand, ownership kicks Demps out the door, then NBA Twitter saying ding dong, the witch is dead. I know the actual sequence of events had more nuance to it, but you get the idea. So this places the majority of the blame for the breakdown on Demps, which to be honest is fair. Could someone have beaten the Lakers offer? Probably, but that doesn't mean the Lakers offer wasn't insanely good and worth at least considering. Without knowing more about what Demps and or ownership were looking to get for Davis, or even if the fact that the Lakers were in the same conference was part of the consideration, we can't say for certain whether the Lakers offer would be seriously considered. For the sake of argument, let's say conference rivalry isn't an issue and that an offer from the Lakers would be considered. Mishandling an offer of that magnitude, especially when it could also be potentially considered as not doing right by their star player, would probably be grounds for dismissal, or at least considering it. So why am I still considering the move to be a bad one? Because it's taking a bad situation and not making a substantial improvement on it. It's essentially addition by subtraction, only removing Demps from the picture isn't going to help the Pelicans much right now, other than having a job vacancy to offer to someone. It's kinda right on the line between decisive and knee-jerk reaction, but the statements do push it toward the latter, which doesn't paint a very good perspective picture for your potential new GM. Now let's look at it another way. Say the Pelicans acknowledged before now that Dell Demps was not their GM of the future, but in the face of everything blowing up around them, decided he had to go sooner rather than later. Obviously you can't really tell the media any of this because that could set off quite the storm, but it is at least a planned decision, right up to the point that the trigger was pulled prematurely. After that, you're still doing damage control and you're potentially in the same boat anyway. Or possibly worse if it gets leaked that you knew you were employing an inferior GM that you weren't going to move forward with, but didn't put them out of their misery in the beginning. One last scenario. The Pelicans have their successor to Dell Demps already in the organization, and the AD trade saga made them realize that now was the time to move forward. Of the hypotheticals I've discussed, this is the least bad. It has the advantage of seeming the most like a planned move, or at least the easiest to make seem like a planned move, and it results in the minimum amount of disruption for the team and its activities. Still, despite all that, it means the new GM is coming in starting on the back foot and potentially not being able to execute their vision from the beginning due to needing to wade through everything that happened before they ended up in the big chair. Just about any way you can spin this situation, there seems to be definite downsides in mid-season firings that outweigh the positives, so it makes you wonder why anybody does it short of a very serious situation that merits it. Sure, you gotta do what you gotta do, but the age-old adage of just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should can definitely be applied here. So in the end, the question still remains, did Dell Demps deserve better? And my answer to that is, well, slightly? To be clear, when your star player demands a trade, that is both an incredibly difficult situation to deal with and a sign that your team is in trouble for the immediate future. But based on Dell Demps' track record, it's just as clear that any new direction the team would need to go in would not include him, and a new direction will definitely be needed with the end of the Anthony Davis era. I'm just not sure that the new direction was absolutely necessary right now, when you can't really start putting plans in motion to a significant degree. Especially when the Pelicans don't have any idea what that direction is right now, outside of not Dell Demps and maybe actually trade AD. Was Dell Demps really so bad that he had to be fired before the, quote, comprehensive and confidential, unquote, search for the new GM could begin? In my opinion, not bad enough for all the baggage that comes with a mid-season firing. Even waiting until the search was underway somewhat would have been better, because as it is, it looks like Dell Demps was fired just because he mishandled a situation that even a great GM would have had some trouble with, never mind a mediocre one, and ownership was looking for someone or something to blame. And yes, Dell Demps does deserve the lion's share of the blame for how Anthony Davis' trade request has been mishandled so far, and even for the Pelicans' struggles as a whole. But when the Pelicans themselves don't really have a different idea, never mind a better one, they can't be completely blameless. But that's just my opinion. On that note, let's bring it in for today. If you listened to the whole thing, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. Hopefully I gave you something to think about, and if I did, it'd be cool if you hit the like button, left your thoughts in the comments section, and definitely by subscribing. While this is the first time I talked about the NBA itself, it won't be the last. I also do NBA 2K content such as commentary and team rebuilding, and I'm live streaming my playthrough of Kingdom Hearts 3 on most weekends, though this weekend I'll be out of town. That's all for now. Until next time, take care y'all.